All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this Building Bots on App Cloud session. My name is Christoph Conrads. I'm a developer evangelist with Salesforce. So before we start, I have to show you this slide that you may have seen before, and you know what it's about. I'm not going to make forward-looking statements too much in this presentation, so you know what you shouldn't do. With that, let's move straight to the agenda for today. So what I will do, I will try to first demystify what bots are all about, talk about that bot revolution that we are entering. And then I will look at three specific examples of building bots. And so the first one is going to be building bots with Slack. Then we'll speak about Facebook Messenger. And finally, we'll try to make Alexa work in this room, and I'm pretty optimistic, but we'll see how it goes. Before we do that, I have a little exercise for you, a little experiment that I want to go through with you. Are you ready? Yeah? Okay, cool. So your first mission, your first job is to actually tell me what the weather is. It's around 64, but I'm not really sure. So you can use any app that you want, but you need to find the weather really, really fast for me. All right, I'll pretend you all found the weather. Okay, you did? What's the temperature outside today? Is it 64? Why? PowerPoint is really smart. Okay, so here's the next one. What's your employee ID? I know that if you work in a large company, sometimes you need that employee ID. I never remember it. And every time I'm asked for my employee ID, I'm like, oh my God. So if you work in a large company, you have that employee ID, do you know how to get to it? Should I give you 15 seconds? 6, employee number 6, that's easy to remember. All right, so the reason I do that little experiment with you is to make a larger point here. There are some new trends that we are kind of seeing in the industry. And one of them is that people start to think that we have way too many apps out there. And it's sometimes really hard to go, first of all, find the app, try to remember which app does what, and what's your favorite app to get that specific information. For instance, in the employee ID example, I really have no idea which app I should use, and it always takes me 10 minutes to actually find my employee ID. All right, so there is a new idea, which is that we may try to talk to someone, just like you use, a messaging app to talk to your friends. Maybe you can use these apps to actually get information. So there is a new trend, which is to use messaging applications as the new platform. And by platform, we really mean the new app container, okay? And so in that container, instead of installing apps, you're going to install bots. Okay, so bots are the new apps if you want. And then instead of a traditional UI, you're going to use language, natural language, as the new user experience. So instead of having a form in front of you, you're just going to use language. And it can be spoken language or it can be written language, right? So that's kind of the new trends that we are seeing out there. So with that, let's try to define exactly what bots are. And of course, there are many ways we can define bots, but for the purpose of this presentation, I will define them as a piece of software that lets you access information or simply perform a task using natural language, so that's an important part. But most importantly, from anywhere, from where you happen to be without having to switch context, right? Without having to go find a new app, load that app, navigate through menus, find the right item in the menu. No, you stay where you are, you don't switch context, and you can get the information right there. So to kind of summarize what we talk about so far, we have that new concept of an application container, a new application container that you see there on the left, in which you install bots instead of installing apps, okay? And so you're going to say something in that messaging app. So we're going to have to send a request to some kind of a service. At that point, you just kind of said something, but we still have no idea what that really means. So we need some kind of artificial intelligence there at the top. So the service needs to make sense of what you said, right? So that's the artificial intelligence piece. And hopefully that thing is going to be able to kind of parse what you said and make sense of it and tell the service that's what that person meant. Then you ask a service provider to kind of get the information that was requested, you format that, and you send the information back to the bot or to the messaging app that the user was using. So that sounds really easy, but there are really many ways to get it wrong. And so there are good bots and there are bad bots. And really, what's going to make the difference is that piece that I called artificial intelligence there. And that includes new disciplines like NLP or natural language processing. It may be image recognition because instead of saying something, you may send an image to the service. It may include sentiment analysis and other disciplines of artificial intelligence. And that's really going to be the key and the difference between a good bot and a bad bot. And if you look at what we did at Salesforce, we recently acquired some new technologies like MetaMind and Prediction.io that are going to help us in these areas to hopefully, let you build good bots and not bad bots. So that's my kind of introduction. Hopefully now we are all on the same page. We understand what we mean when we say bots, and we understand why and how they can be useful. So I want to move on and shift gears and start looking at how we can actually build these bots. So the first example that we're going to use here is Slack. Slack is a relatively new kind of messaging application, collaboration application that has been really popular, and so we'll see how we can build a bot inside Slack. And in fact, there are many, many ways, or at least there are at least 3, that you can use to build bots in Slack. So the first one that we're going to look at in Slack, they call that incoming webhook. So what's going to happen here is that you're going to basically get Salesforce to simply automatically post information to Slack, information that you think may be relevant to the users in that Slack channel or that Slack group. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to switch to my computer, and I'm going to show you my Slack group, so my Slack channel. And I can, collaborate with my friends here. So this is really the messaging app that I'm using. So I'm going to switch right to Salesforce. And in Salesforce, I have a process here. I'm in Process Builder. And I have a process that's called Post Price Changes to Slack. Now, you may remember, if you attended the keynote yesterday, that we used that real estate use case, sample application. And so that's the use case that I'm going to use here. So this is a real estate company, and we manage properties. And when we will change the price of a property, maybe we want all the brokers, and they may use Slack, we want to let them know that the price of that property changed. And so I created a super simple process in Process Builder here. You see that I test if the price changed. If yes, I'm going to post to Slack. And of course, we don't have a native action in Process Builder to do that. So I have a very simple Apex class here that I'm going to show you. So it's 50 lines of code. That's going to do the right thing to actually post information to Slack. So let's see if that actually works. So I'm going to go to Salesforce in a detail page for property. I'm looking at that property here. Okay, maybe it's not selling, so I'm going to go ahead and change the price to 800,000. Okay, so I'm going to do that. All right, and go back to my Slack channel, and you see that automatically I get a message, an automated message generated by Process Builder that basically lets me know that the price of that property changed. So that's the first level of integration. So the user didn't really trigger that action. It's really an external event happening in an application, in this case Salesforce, that's going to automate that process and post information to a messaging application. So we're going to look at a second example here. In Slack, they call that slash commands. And in this case, the user is really going to trigger and start the action. So maybe I need to obtain some information from an external system, but again, I don't want to switch context, okay? So if you work in Salesforce, maybe you want to know from within Slack, what are your top 3 opportunities? Or maybe you're just chatting with someone and that person asks you, okay, what's the phone number of Joe? And well, you really don't want to switch back to Salesforce, navigate the menus, find Joe, then come back to Slack. So you want to access that information from within Slack. So slash commands allow you to do that. So you see on this slide, you're just going to type slash to indicate that it's not regular text, it's actually a command. And then you will type a specific command. And that we're going to post that request to a Heroku app. The reason we do that is because that request at that point is not authenticated. Okay, so at some point we will need to authenticate, and we'll do that in Heroku. So Heroku will do 2 things here. It will transform that request or pass that request along to Salesforce, but with an authentication token. And the other thing that Heroku can do here is to actually cache information that you ask all the time so that you don't make too many API calls to Salesforce. Right? So let's see how that would work. I'm going to go back to my Slack channel here. And if I'm in that use case of the real estate example, of course, I need to agree on some kind of a convention here or a naming convention. And I'm going to say, for instance, house search Boston. Okay? And here we go. So I get from the system the list of houses that are for sale in Boston. And obviously, all these houses actually come from Salesforce. As the broker, I manage these properties in Salesforce. Maybe I want to check if there are recent price changes. So I'm going to say house changes, and it looks like there is only one recent price change, and there we have it. And of course, you see that link there, which means that, okay, I just got, very conveniently quick access to the data, but if at any point I want to see the full-blown details, I can always click that link and end up in Salesforce. So this is for my real estate example, but you could do the same thing for traditional Salesforce data. So for instance, if I'm interested in my pipeline, and you see that you get help there, contextual help. Okay, yeah, we know that command, and I can type a number that basically tells me, give me my top 3 opportunities in Salesforce. And look what's going to happen here. Okay, it's going to go right to Salesforce, and it's going to say, hey, here is your list of top 3 opportunities in your pipeline, and you recognize them because they come from a demo org, so you're very familiar with that. Okay, so at this point, I'm saying, oh, okay, I have that opportunity there. I need to call the person in charge of that because it's not moving. So maybe I need to give that person a call. But again, I don't want to shift or switch context. So from here, I would like the phone number of maybe the contact that I have there, Forbes, and here we have it. Okay, all within the context of Slack, of my messaging application. Then from here, maybe I speak to him and he says, well, I didn't receive your revised or updated offer. So maybe at that point, I'll make it very simple here. I'll say, I need to create a new case. And the case is going to be that I want to send a new offer. Okay, so the point here is that it's not only read-only, you can actually write back to Salesforce. Okay, and here we go. It created a new case, and again, I can click that link and go straight to the case inside Salesforce. So I'd like to do so. This is really what you can do. What I'd like to do now is to actually show you a little bit about the code and how this happens in code. So this is a Node.js application that is that Heroku application that you saw in the middle of my slide, if you remember that. Okay, so no need to be Node.js experts here. What you see on the slide is a bunch of endpoints. So you see that here, so I can do /pipeline, I can do /contact, I can do /case. So this is really the convention. These are the endpoints that are reachable and that have been configured within Slack to actually ask Heroku to do something. So maybe let's look at, when I ask pipeline, look, it asks the opportunity module to invoke that execute function. So let's take a quick look at that. So I'm going to open the opportunity module, and you see the execute function there. So the first thing that I do here is to actually look at a token that Slack is going to send me along with the request. Because obviously, you don't want anybody to just invoke that endpoint and get that information. You want to make sure that it's an authorized party that is actually requesting that information. So I will show you in a second in Slack how you configure a /command and how you actually get that token. So the first thing I say is, well, if the token doesn't match, then I'm going to do nothing, and I'm going to say invalid token, okay? So then I access the text parameter of the body. And remember, in the case of pipeline, it's a number that indicates the number of opportunities that I want to see back in Slack. So if I passed one, I will use that. Otherwise, I will return 5 opportunities. And guess what? From here, it's really business as usual. I'm simply going to use some Salesforce REST APIs to actually go query your good old friend, the opportunity object. Right? So from here, it's really, business as usual. I'm actually using enforce here to invoke that REST service inside Salesforce, and I'm done. So the rest is really very traditional stuff, except that, as you can see here, I'm not going to cover the details of that, but it's important to know that all these platforms have their own formatting capabilities to make the data set look good, in this case within Slack, and it's going to be different within Messenger. Okay, so now what I want to show you the other piece of the puzzle, which was that how do you configure that /command in Slack? So I'm in the admin settings here in Slack, and you see all the /commands that I defined here. So for instance, you see the pipeline command. So let's go look at that. And you will see here that this is, so when you create a new /command in Slack, it's going to ask you which service should it call. And so in this case, I point to my Heroku application and tell Slack to simply call the pipeline endpoint in that Heroku application. And Slack is going to generate a token for me. Remember that token? And that's the one that we check inside Heroku to make sure that it's not some hacker who is trying to, to get that information from the Heroku application. So if you want, that's really the handshake between Slack and the Heroku application here. So that is /commands in Slack. Now, the problem, we are going to move back to the next solution here. /commands are great, but they are kind of power user centric, right? Because you need to, it's almost like using the command line. You need to remember all these commands. What are they? So it's kind of power user. So what if we could do something very, very similar, but instead of using /commands, we would use natural language. And that is really the third option when you use when you use Slack, you can create bots. And bots do very much the same thing as slash commands, but you use natural language. In terms of the technical aspects, it's slightly different because instead of Slack posting requests to your Heroku server, Heroku is going to listen to a socket server opened by Slack. And basically, Slack, through that socket server, is going to post all the messages to your Heroku app, right? Because in this case, since we don't have a naming convention to know what you're really requesting, the Heroku app, and that's really how bots work, it's just going to listen to what you say and decide if it wants to handle that or not. All right, so we have a socket server here. Heroku is listening to that socket server and tries to recognize language patterns. And if it does, at some point, it's going to say, oh, OK, I'm going to handle that. I'm going to reply to that. Okay, so that's really the difference from a technical point of view. Other than that, Heroku is still there because that initial communication channel between Slack and Heroku is not authenticated, and it can still do caching for you. So let's go back to my example here. I'm going to go back to my Slack channel. And so in this case, it's going to work with direct messages. So in this case, I know that I want to talk specifically to that bot. So I'm going to look at a bot named DreamBot here. And with that bot, I can just talk as if it was a friend. OK, so I'm going to say, for instance, 3 bedrooms in Boston. OK, and that's it. Now, of course, that language pattern was very simple. Again, what's going to make a really good bot is when it can really make sense of what you said. Or I can say, for instance, here, price changes. Okay, give me the price changes. So that's the dream bot. But you may also want to use bots for traditional Salesforce information like Sales Cloud. So for instance, I could say here, search account Marriott. Ooh, okay, so I was actually in the middle of something, so let's finish that. Okay, all right, here we go. All right, so I'm going to say search account Marriott. So Marriott is one of my accounts, and I don't have any accounts called Marriott, so I'm going to say search account Burlington, for instance. I think that one should be there. OK, and here we go. So same thing. So very similar to using the slash command, but in this case, I can just speak freely. So maybe I can do here, which was what I was in the middle of. I can say create contact. So the point here is that bots are not just request response. You should be able to have a conversation with a bot. So in this case, it's a little more, the interaction is a little more complicated. So I'm going to say, I want to create a contact. OK, so the bot is asking me, OK, what's the name? I'm going to say Joe. What's the last name? Smith. What's the title? VP. OK, and what's the phone number? That's the phone number. Okay, and now the contact is automatically created inside Salesforce. So this is more of a conversational bot that you can use. Now, in this case, I knew that the Force bot that was configured there knew how to give me that information. But sometimes you don't even know that a bot is there, and that's the more kind of freaky part of bots. Bots are listening to what you say, and they decide to answer. So in this case, I was in a direct message conversation with the bot, but I can be just in a general conversation here. And I speak with my friends, and I say, I'm trying to learn Lightning components. It's hard. So I can say, for instance, hey, I'm confused about Lightning components. Okay, I'm just sharing that with my friends, but not like that. Okay. All right, and look who is there listening to me, the Trailhead bot. And the Trailhead bot says, no problem, I can totally help you with that. I think you should go check out these modules in Trailhead. So this is an example where you didn't know there was a bot there, you were just talking in a regular conversation, and then the bot can actually help you there. Again, I could say, for instance, which process automation tool should I use? Again, I'm not talking specifically to a bot, and the bot again sends me to Trailhead because there is a really good module, by the way, to help us with that. But you see that Trailhead bot is also available here in my direct messages. So now if I wanted to have a personal, a direct conversation with the bot one-on-one, I can do that too. So for instance, and this doesn't exist, this is science fiction at this point, this is not one of these, well, this is one of these forward-looking statements, and it's totally science fiction. It's a custom POC if you want. I could say here, I can ask Trailhead, hey, Trailhead, quiz me on Lightning components, all right? And then the bot, and it's another example of a conversational bot, the bot is starting to ask me questions. And so it's really hard to concentrate, but I think I'm gonna say 2 here. What part of the Lightning component? You're right, event handlers. Yeah, I think that should be, yes. Okay, and then I think it's 1 here. And good, I'm doing great. The last one, I think that should be JavaScript. All right, and I earned my badge. Great. Okay, so doesn't exist, don't try it. Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. It doesn't exist yet, but you get the idea. All right, so let's take a look at the code again to build bots like that. So I'm gonna go back in my code here. I'm gonna look at my server.js. Again, this is simply the Heroku application. And so I'm showing you the real estate example here. And you see what's happening here. I'm gonna try to find a very simple one. Here we go. All right, so we use a framework called BotKit here, which is an open source framework. And you can use APIs like this. Controller hears something that sounds like this. So this is very simple parsing of text. We basically use regular expressions here to parse what the user said. And so if I hear something that looks like something, then bedrooms, like a number of bedrooms, then I should do this. And look what I'm doing. I'm simply invoking find properties in a Salesforce object, and that Salesforce object is here. And this is simply a data service, if you want, that abstracts a SOQL query. You see that I'm, again, doing simply a SOQL query to find that information in Salesforce, okay? So this is a super simple bot using BotKit, and by the way, BotKit is pluggable, so if you use another AI system, you can plug that into BotKit, but by default, it's gonna use regular expressions to make sense of what the user said. And so again, showing you now the configuration piece of a bot. So if you go in Slack, you look at your custom integrations, and you see here that I have bots. And in this case, I have a number of bots. I have DreamBot, which is my real estate bot. I have ForceBot, which is the Salesforce traditional Sales Cloud bot. And I have a Trailhead bot. So let's just take one of them. Okay. And again, there is a token here that we use to make sure that everything is safe. And you provide some information, and that's really it. So the magic is that in your Heroku application, you need to listen to a socket providing that token, and that's going to establish the communication with the specific the specific server inside Slack, or you will get the appropriate message through the socket server inside Slack. So these were bots and some code examples to show you how to do bots. Now, there is a there is a problem that we didn't really talk about so far, and that's really an important problem. So far, you notice how I got the data magically from Salesforce without ever authenticating. And the reason I was able to get the data there is because I'm using what we call an integration user, that was created in Salesforce. So in other words, there is that user that nobody knows about except the Heroku application, and the Heroku application use that user to authenticate with Salesforce. So when I make a request from Slack, I always use the same user to get the information from Salesforce. That may be okay for some applications where you share some, everybody shares the same application. But obviously, if you're looking for your 3 top opportunities, that's kind of your own opportunities and nobody else's. Okay, so the problem is Slack doesn't have built-in authentication with Salesforce. But the good news is that every time Slack makes a request, you get a Slack user ID as a parameter of that request, okay? So the solution is, if you're not authenticated yet, is to then point the user to a page where the user can authenticate against Salesforce using OAuth, okay? And when that's done, at that point, you have the 2 things that you need. You have the Slack user ID and you have the Salesforce user ID, right? Because when you got to that page, you actually knew the the Slack user ID. After authenticated, you have both. So in the Heroku app, we will keep track of the mapping between the Slack ID and the Salesforce ID. So that the next time you make a request, we know, oh, it comes from this Slack user ID. Let me retrieve the token from that user, and I can make the request on your behalf in Salesforce. So in other words, the process is going to look like this. The Heroku app is going to keep that mapping, if you want, between Slack user ID and Salesforce token. When a request comes from Slack, we retrieve the Salesforce token, and we perform the request on the behalf of that user. Okay, so let's look at a quick example of that. So I'm going to go back to Slack here, and I'm going to say I want to log in this case. Okay, so I use a slash command to that. That's fine. Okay, and so in that case, we reply here. We say, okay, well, you're not authenticated yet, but if you go to this URL, we can authenticate. And if you look closely here, what do we pass as part of the URL? We pass the Slack user ID. Now, for additional security, you may want to encrypt that at the server side and decrypt it when you get back to that page, but you get the idea. So I'm going to go there. I'm going to click that link, and of course, I get my OAuth authentication process here. I'm going to say OK, and bingo. Now my Slack user ID is linked to the Salesforce user ID, and from here, all the requests that I make from Slack are going to be made on the behalf of that specific user. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit, and the next integration that I want to look at here is Facebook Messenger. So remember, we use messaging apps as the new app container. Let's look at Facebook Messenger. Now it's going to be really easy because we totally demystified how bots work in general. So let's look at this architecture that should look super familiar, except that on the left, it's not Slack anymore, but it's Messenger. From Facebook Messenger, we're going to make a request to Heroku. Heroku is going to connect to Salesforce. And by the way, the authentication mechanism that we just covered would work the exact same way in this case. So in other words, you can either work with an integration user where everybody shares the same credentials, or you can do the little trick that we just talked about before. Before I show you exactly how it works, I want to look at trying to organizing our code a little bit, because as we are building these bots for different platforms, we start to realize that there are really some patterns that we can make very generic and reusable. So you always have on the left that bot that lives in a messaging app. It always makes a call to a bot service, okay? And so what does that bot service have to do? Remember, it has to make sense of what you're saying. So it's gonna speak to some kind of a processor, natural language processor, some kind of AI system that's gonna, you're gonna give it a sentence and it's gonna return, I think the user meant that, okay? When you know what the user meant, you can ask a handler for that specific action to execute that action. So the handler typically is gonna then ask a service provider, which in this case is Salesforce, right? We know that you meant, give me my top 3 opportunities, so now I can ask Salesforce for the top 3 opportunities. And the last step, we get the data. The last step is gonna be to format the data for that specific messaging platform, and then we can return everything to the client. So after building a number of bots for many platforms, that's kind of my framework that I have implemented, and I will show you the code in a second. Every time I build a bot, it's kind of that architecture of code that I'm implementing. So now let's take a look at building a bot for Messenger. So I'm going to switch back to my browser here. In fact, the way bots are implemented in Facebook is that bots, it's kind of weird initially, are essentially Facebook pages, right? So, and they are kind of bot enabled, but you start with a Facebook page. And so I created a page here that I call Dream House. So this is the name of my real estate company that we're going to work with. And so just like in Slack, the way you interact with your bot is using, Facebook Messenger. So I'm going to click on that. Right? And you see that I already talked to the Dream House bot here, but I can say, hey, hi. And the important thing about that response here is that the bot knows who I am, okay? And since I've never met that bot before, let's pretend, I'm gonna ask, hey, what can I do? And the bot says, hey, you can ask me things like this and that. Now at this point, you can continue to chat with the bot here. I find that very difficult in that little chat box there. So what you can also do is bring up the Messenger app in Facebook, and it runs in the browser, that's just messenger.com, or it runs on your phone. So the Messenger app that on your phone would work totally fine as well, and it's actually probably nicer to do it that way. So I can do, for instance, houses in Boston. Okay, I'm going to do houses in Boston. And here we go. So that's Facebook returning the list of houses in Boston to me. And these houses, obviously, remember, they come from Salesforce. Now, Facebook has a really nice formatting capability to present the data consistently. So, their business is their focus is more consumer apps. So I think they had like a launch partner. I think it was it Domino Pizza, but that's the kind of application that they are targeting. So instead of houses, these could be pizzas, but the good thing for the user is that the user interface would look the same, would look consistent. So again, you don't have to learn yet another app. Okay, and so you can scroll through that. Okay, okay, looks good. I'm interested in that house. I can get the information about the broker, or maybe I'll take another one here. Or that one looks really cool. So I'm gonna say, okay, I want to schedule a visit here. Okay, so again, this is all done by the bot, right? So the bot says, okay, no problem. The bot looked at the calendar of that broker, and we saw that we had 3 openings here, and I'm gonna choose that one, and I'm done. Okay, the appointment is confirmed, and everything works really well. Okay, so that's essentially the same thing. It's formatted a little different, but you get the idea. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to go, so that was my dream house bot, but I can do, again, the same thing for your traditional Salesforce information. So I already did it here, but I'll do it again. Search account Marriott. And so this is really coming from the account object in Salesforce. Search account Marriott. My bot is sleeping. Okay, I think it just woke up. Okay, here we go. And then, these are all the properties. So for instance, okay, I need to call someone at the JW Marriott so I can get my contacts here. So this is what Facebook, that's a little different. They call that post back. So it's a way to interact at a deeper level with their bot. So here we go. So I can do that and then view, open in Salesforce. So the thing that that Facebook has that Slack doesn't have yet is that way to interact back with the UI and do something cool at that level. Now, I have, of course, my Trailhead bot, okay? And so my Trailhead bot, I can talk to my Trailhead bot. And remember, it starts with a page. So the reason I have them here in my list is because I talked to these bots before. So I could do something like, for instance, search, not waves, but Wave. So I want to learn about Wave. So I'm going to ask my Trailhead bot, okay, give me modules on Wave because I really need to learn. And then, so these are the three options. So you see, it's just like the house. It's the same user interface. I'm using the same messaging app, but I get very different results, obviously. And so I can click there and go straight to that. And I can say, finally, quiz me on lightning, wow, components. Okay, for instance. Okay, ready, set, go. Okay, now you see that because I have that post-back capability in Facebook, I don't have to type numbers, 1, 2, or 3. I can say, okay, what language do you use? I think it's JavaScript. Okay, great work. JavaScript was the right answer. How long is a case? Insensitive object ID. Anybody? Help me. 18? Let's see. Okay, 18. Excellent. Okay, so you see the kind of interaction that you can actually have, and you can build really, really, really cool things here. So let me quickly show you the code for a messenger bot. So again, remember it's just a node application on Heroku. So remember my framework that I told you about. So here's the way my little framework works. So I have a file, a text file that I call dictionary.txt. And so basically I have handlers here. Let me show you something very simple. So for instance, price changes here is the name of a handler. Okay, so in JavaScript, that is going to be executed if I hear you type something that includes price changes. So if I hear you type something that includes price changes, I'm going to execute that handler. So that was a super simple one. But if I hear you say something like a number bedrooms in something that's probably the city from something that's probably your minimum price to something, then I'm going to execute this handler. Okay, you see how this works? So now I have another file where I have all my handlers. All right, and again from here it's super easy because I'm going to simply invoke, like I did before, a helper function in my Salesforce object, which is going to execute a SOCL statement and return the information for me. All right, so that's an example of how you would build a bot in Messenger. They're really cool, they're new, and as you can see, the UI is very polished and very nice. And going back to the slides, what's really setting them apart for now is that ability to handle postbacks, which essentially lets you define actions there that you see at the bottom of that slide, where you can interact back with the response there. Okay, so we have a few minutes left to cover the last type of bots that we had on the agenda for today. And this is an Alexa bot. And you will hear, there is no shortage of hype out there. You'll hear people say, hey, voice is the new UI. You don't need graphical user interfaces anymore. It's all you just ask and you'll magically get the answer. Well, that works for certain tasks. But not necessarily for all of them. So let's see the architecture. Everything should look super familiar by now because once again, it's the exact same architecture. Your messaging app in this case is not Slack or Messenger, it's Alexa. And of course, you're not gonna use text, you're gonna use voice. But Alexa is going to do the hard work for you of handling the voice recognition. So what you're going to actually post to Heroku is not voice, it's actually text because Alexa will have processed that information for you already. All right, let's try this now, okay? So for instance, the real estate example, we're going to ask what's for sale in Boston, okay? Alexa, ask Dream House what's for sale in Boston.
Okay. In what city?
I told her that. Boston?
How many bedrooms?
3.
Around what price?
800,000.
Okay. Here is what I found for 3 bedrooms in Boston around $800,000. 110 Baxter Street, Boston, $850,000. 95 Gloucester Street, Boston, $690,000.
This is also covered by the forward-looking statements. This is not true, so don't, these houses don't exist. Okay, so Alexa, ask Dream House for price changes.
Okay, here are the recent price changes. 145 Commonwealth Avenue, Boston. Price changed from $820,000 to $800,000. 145 Commonwealth Avenue, Boston. Price changed from $830,000 to $820,000. 145 Commonwealth Avenue, Boston.
Almost over.
Price changed from $840,000 to $830,000.
Okay, and of course, it wouldn't be a demo without Trailhead, so let's ask something to Trailhead. Alexa, ask Trailhead for questions about Lightning components.
Which language do you use to write a Lightning component? 1. JavaScript. 2. Java. 3. Apex.
1, thank you.
I don't know what you said.
1.
Correct. In which tool can admins assemble Lightning components in a point-and-click environment? 1.
Let's get it
Process
wrong.
Builder. 2. Schema Builder. 3. App Builder.
1. It's not true.
Oops.
I like
The
that.
right answer was 3. App Builder. Congratulations. You answered all the questions and earned a new mini badge.
See, I still get my badge. Great. Thank you. All right, so for the last time, let's take a quick look at the code here. So everything is going to happen in these handlers. And so remember when I asked for price changes, again, I'm simply going to do a quick call to Salesforce price, find price changes, and then I'm going to get the information from there. There are much more sophisticated requests that you can make. Like, for instance, you can have a conversation, like I mentioned before, and you heard it, like I was asking what's for sale. Then she had to ask me which city, how many bedrooms, my price range. So this is, again, the way you would go about creating that conversation. And I see a lot of people either taking pictures or filming this, but I have really good news for you. And I'm gonna actually stay here for 1 second. And the good news is that all this stuff is available right here. So we created this in the last few weeks or months. It's a new microsite that's called dreamhouseapp.io. Okay, and basically the application that you saw yesterday in the keynote, it's kind of the exact same app. It shows how to build an end-to-end application on the Salesforce App Cloud platform. So you will see here, if you scroll down, you will see, okay, it starts with the declarative, how do you do app builder, process builder, lightning components, everything there. And for each piece, you have a video. So let's take a look at Alexa. So you have a video. So that's basically the demo that I just did. And then I point you to the source code, to the GitHub repository. So all these demos, not only all the bots, but all the demos that you saw on the demo stations, they are all available here. So please go there, tweet about it. Make sure that everybody knows about dreamhouseapp.io, because you have a ton of code. You have a package that you can install in 5 minutes. So it is super cool. And that is really what I wanted to show you here. Back on the slide, if you didn't capture that, dreamhouseapp.io, and you have access to all the source code right there. With that, that's really all I wanted to share with you. So hopefully that will inspire you to go build your bots, either with Slack, with Facebook Messenger, or with Alexa. It's a ton of fun to build. A good place to start is that repository, because you'll have the code ready for you. And so have fun building bots, and thank you very much. Thank you.